and welcome to Desert Martin Parish Church on this, the third Sunday after Trinity. We're trying something new this week, and in addition to you watching this reflection on the video, on the Facebook page and the WhatsApp groups, we're also going to take try drive-in church. Well, by the time you've seen this, we will have tried it. So hopefully it will have worked. It's certainly some way of trying to come together in a socially distanced way, in a way that we can make sure we can, or as far as possible, we can keep each other safe, but still come together to worship. So if you were at the drive-in service, I'd be keen to know what you thought of it. Maybe you could leave some messages on the WhatsApp group. Please, I don't mind criticism as long as it's constructive. Ways of making things better, not just having a go for the sake of it. But you wouldn't do that anyway, so it doesn't really need to be said. Anyway, welcome. And to those of you from our greater virtual church, it's great to have you with us again today. Now, the reading I want us to reflect on is from Matthew chapter 10, verses 40 to 42. 3 short verses, but there's a lot in there. So we'll read from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 10, verses 40 to 42. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever becomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever becomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So our gospel passage today comes at the end of Matthew chapter 10. And that's at the end of the second major section on Jesus' teaching after the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus evidently intends his disciples to be the answer of their own prayers, working through the grace of God and in the power of the Holy Spirit. Of course, those gifts were yet to be made available. That became on Pentecost. The disciples were to act as Jesus' envoys, to speak in his name. They were to extend his ministry, proclaiming the same good news and performing the same good works of healing that he has done. However, he does warn them that they will not receive a universal welcome in 10:14, verses 14 and 15. And they can expect to experience the same hostility that Jesus himself had experienced, for he is sending them out like sheep into the midst of wolves. Chapter 10, verse 16. They can expect to encounter persecution and trials, and for a disciple is not above the teacher, nor the slave above the master. In extreme cases, they may even be prepared for painful divisions from their own families, and to be willing to put the mission that Jesus calls them to before that of family loyalties. Verses 34 to 38. For all of this risk and suffering, Jesus promises the following: those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Verse 39. Matthew, of course, is not only recalling Jesus' personal instructions to his first disciples, he's also speaking to his own community of disciples a few generations later. And in turn, he is speaking to us here today. You see, there is still a need to send out labourers into the harvest fields of our own local communities. And those sent will still need to depend on the hospitality and generosity of others. Jesus says of those who offer such hospitalities, of those who give hospitality, he says the following: whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Now, in the ancient world, identity was very much tied to family, to clan, and to the community. It was understood that in showing hospitality, one welcomed not just the individual in front of you, but implicitly the community that sent that individual, the whole group of folk, the person that they all represent. A tradition that I'm glad to say, although a blow-in myself, it still exists in our own community here in Desert Martin and Terminini. And I can assure you it is harder to find, although it is still existent, it is harder to find in the bigger towns and certainly the cities, even in our own land. Therefore, welcoming a disciple of Jesus would mean receiving the very presence of Jesus himself, and of course, the one who sent him, God the Father. Finally, Jesus says, "And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward." Verse 42. The phrase little ones in Greek, mikros, often refers to children, but Matthew uses it to refer to Jesus' disciples, particularly those who are younger in their faith, less mature, or are potentially vulnerable. The statement about giving a cup of cold water to one of these little ones points ahead to the parable of judgment, and you can look ahead to Matthew chapter 25 for that. Here the Son of Man says to the righteous, "I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. And truly I tell you, just as you did to one of the least of these who are the members of my family, you did it to me." The righteous who attend the needs of the littlest ones are told, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." You see, sent by God, Jesus likewise sends his disciples to take part in his mission in proclaiming in both word and deed the good news of God's kingdom and the fact that it was drawing near. And Matthew assumes that the church it's a sent church. And when I say a sent church, I mean a proactive church, not just a reactive church, not a community that just sits and waits for things to happen to it. No, it goes out and does things for others. In his opinion, there simply is no other way to be church. It's proactive. It's not passive. And this understanding, we have all seen being recovered in very real and tangible ways over these last difficult 15, 16 weeks in our lockdown world, where we see acts of kindness. People actually, when they ask the question, "How are you?" they actually want to hear the answer. "Can I help you?" And they actually are looking for a way of reaching out and helping the less fortunate individual. There is a growing awareness that mission is not just doing yet another Bible study course that the rector or the pastor has decided to run. No, it is, or suggested ought to be, the defining purpose of everything that the church does. So, a question: what does it mean to be sent? Well, in our ongoing COVID-19 world, we can't yet do church on a Sunday as we used to back in March, only a few weeks ago, although sometimes it feels like a very long time ago, particularly as I come into this church to record these videos and the pews are empty and the place, it just feels a bit strange. It's sort of lost the feeling of coziness. But today, as I mentioned at the beginning of the introduction of this video, we are going to, or have tried, depending when you see this video clip, something new, something we've never tried before, drive-in church. And it's something you may have seen around about the place. There have been a few other examples of this within our own diocese in the Church of Ireland, and I know other Christian denominations are also using this format. And it's a step towards something a little bit closer to church as we knew it. At least we can come together as a worshipping congregation, even if we do have to stay in our separate cars. At least there's still a sense of coming together. And as of course, only at the end of last week, full week of June, new guidelines have opened up for the potential for restarting what has been called in-church worship again. But even this in-church worship will be very different to what we've been used to. Back in March, there will be a lot of restrictions, a lot of things, rules we'll have to obey. And dare I say it, I know some of you may have found some of the rules I've had to ask you to observe for drive-in church maybe a little bit frustrating, but they'll be even more frustrating for in-church worship when we decide to go down that route. But as I keep stressing to everybody I meet, my first priority, and our bishop's first priority, and our select vestry's first priority is not starting services. It's keeping you safe and keeping you healthy, and most importantly, not exposing you to the risk of becoming ill or worse. If we can't achieve that objective, we stop. But we have a method and a routine that we can work on. So we'll just see how things develop over the next few weeks. But even with these restrictions and the way that we are even trying to do church, be it virtually, as at the moment, or through drive-in church, or through in-church worship again, the restrictions we're living with at the moment don't mean we're off the hook for that going out thing I mentioned earlier. You see, the entire body of the church are sent out into the world to tell and to be the good news of Jesus Christ. All, and I stress the word all, not just the clerics, not the pastors, not the elders, whoever the officers are in the church, the leadership group in the church. It's not just them, it's everybody. Because we are a church of all believers, a priesthood of all believers. And all are sent out to act as Christ to others, with humility and making themselves vulnerable, yes, and exposing themselves to the risk of rejection. As I said before, our church doors remain closed, sadly, and no longer can people just slip in at the back and have a wee look to see what's going on. Those days don't exist anymore. So what would happen if instead we answered our calling to bring the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, to the folk out there? That's what I'm attempting to do today to you guys who are watching this on your computer or your laptops, on your tablets, particularly for the folk who are, I don't know. I see names applying to join the group, and I willingly embrace it and welcome you. But I don't necessarily know who you are. And maybe one day we'll get a chance to say hello. But please do keep in touch. Don't just disappear if the churches do open again. We would love to see you. So what would happen? What would happen if we truly answered our calling to bring the gospel to everybody outside? What would happen if we truly believed that we are the presence of Christ to everybody we meet? And we're not us. We are representatives of Christ, like ambassadors. What would happen if we saw every chance encounter, every conversation as an opportunity to speak words of grace and love and healing? Every interaction as an opportunity to model Christ's love for your neighbour. Now, as we continue in this less stringent form of lockdown, I'm worried. I fear that our societal self-restraint is beginning to, or has already broken down. We've seen examples across the water in England, in Bournemouth Beach. We've heard of examples in Belfast of raves in the university area. And it seems that people are going back to the old ways, rather than saying, what can we do to keep everybody safe, including myself? We seem to be slipping back into, it's my right to do whatever it is I want to do, and you can't stop me. And we seem to be beginning to lose that corporate voice of accepting our responsibility of love and care to our neighbours in the way we act, in the way that we express our freedoms, not to do things that will cause harm to others. And of course that reminds me of how the Apostle Paul referred to, for example, meat that had been sacrificed to Roman gods. It wouldn't corrupt you, but for those who are weak in the faith, it sends the wrong signals, like politicians acting in ways that they tell us not to act. It sends out the wrong signals. And I can't help but paraphrase that wonderful phrase, and just because politicians have said, oh, you can now reduce social distancing from 2 meters to 1+, it doesn't mean the virus has gone away, Absolutely not. And it's waiting for a chance to replicate itself again. Friends, we may not always receive a positive response when we take the risk to reach out to others in moments. Yet we may be surprised at how many are willing to receive what we might consider humble and small efforts, indiscriminate acts of kindness. Like last week, acknowledging a man sitting in the chemist and he was holding his hand as he seemed to be upset. And I saw someone walk over to him, ask him if he was okay. Well, he wasn't, but he appreciated being noticed. Remember, we have Jesus' promise. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. You see, the bottom line, folks, and what living out your faith is all about, is whatever we do in his name, to reach out, no matter how apparently small and insignificant it may seem. It's never about us. It's never about what we're doing. It's all about Jesus. It's all about him. It's all about loving our neighbour. So as I close, I ask you to prayerfully click on the link below and listen and reflect prayerfully on the song that will play. And the words, it's actually Diana Ross's song. It's reach out and touch somebody's hand. Obviously we don't physically touch people's hands, but we can reach out in love. So I invite you just to listen to the words, watch the captions on the screen, and ask what God wants you to do.